Who knew you could paint with a potato? Here's a look at the Poptaters Bob Ross. Poptaters puts a fun twist and mashup onto two iconic classics and adds a touch of playfulness in any space. The 4-inch Bob Ross figure comes with 15 interchangeable parts, including one original potato head piece. Before we start making hash browns and happy little trees, I'd like to thank the folks over at Super Impulse that did provide the Poptaters Bob Ross Collector's Edition Spud. We can have a look at this video. We're going to get things underway, obviously, by grabbing the tape measure just to see how tall the Spud stands and factoring his big giant afro, one of the calling cards of Bob Ross. The potato head of Bob Ross stands 6 inches in height, or it's about 15 centimeters tall. One thing I think that Super Impulse did that was really smart was to include a display stand in which Bob Ross can stand on top of. But it does also one better than that too. If you look at the tube that we unboxed at the very beginning of this video, you'll notice that I took the top of it off and I took the bottom of it off as well. Well, to look at just the top layer, for example, the top serves as also a stand. Now, you can either have it this way, where Poptaters is actually elevated, which does make, unfortunately, a little more of a harder time for poor Bob Ross to stand on top of. Or I suppose you can also flip this around and have the figure standing this way as well, which makes for a much more smoother surface. But it does also one better too, because if you put the figure over to the side here, you grab the bottom half, and in both the cases, I actually just cut the tape around the outer parameter of this. So I remove the bottom half of the tube, and then I take the top half of the tube. And then if you take the two and you sandwich them together, and you have to flip this around in order to do this, you put them together, and you sort of got yourself a little tiny container to which you can then take all the extra parts if you happen to dismantle Bob Ross, which we will be doing. You can actually put them inside the container. I think that's a really smart use of the packaging and really clever on Super Impulse's part. So we're going to put that to the side. We're going to get back to that in a moment. And then, of course, Bob Ross himself, I've already taken the liberty of putting all the pieces on him. When you do technically get him out of its packaging, all of the parts that you see already attached to him. We're just going to essentially reverse the steps, and we're going to take everything off of him. Getting, though, a closer look at Bob Ross. Now, overlooking the obvious thing about Bob Ross merchandise, I know there's some dark territory to cover when it comes to Bob Ross's legacy left behind, but just the very idea that we have finally still get ourselves Bob Ross stuff, merchandise or not, in the stores where people can still see his legacy being carried on. I'm all for that, even though, again, like the profits generally go to the wrong direction. I'm just happy we finally get ourselves, well, not finally, that we continue to get ourselves Bob Ross stuff. Now, as it certainly goes for potatoes, he's a little more longer this time around. He's not a wide potato. Bob Ross, a more leaner kind of guy, as he's painting, of course, the many paintings that he did in his Joy of Painting series. Of course, all the things that you would expect Bob Ross to have, like, for example, his big giant plastic afro, his beard, his trademark light blue shirt, blue pants. And again, he's got his little palette in his one hand, paintbrush in the other. The only thing that's really being missed here, unfortunately, in a Poptaters version of Bob Ross, is not having a little tiny pea pod, his little baby squirrel he'd often at times have inside his pocket, although this one doesn't actually have a pocket. But other than that, it does look very much like Bob Ross. There's some articulation, so you can move his arms back and forth. The one that actually does have the palette, by the way, is removable, so you want to just make sure you don't lose that. But it does also cause a little bit more weight. At least it does rest against his boot, but it's really hard to kind of actually have his arm up like that because the palette's a little bit more heavier. The paintbrush he actually more freely can hold up above his head, although again, you can remove this, so if you remove it, it looks like he's actually putting his hand up at the back of the class. Other than that, I mean, it's a nice looking representation of Bob Ross as a potato. We can go ahead then and take the parts off. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to remove the arms carefully. I'm not so much worried about the fact that this one does have the paintbrush, but this one here that has the palette, I'm going to go ahead and just remove his arm right now. The palette is very easily to remove, and I've actually dropped it on the floor a couple of times. Now, normally in his Joy of Painting series, he'd actually have a whole slew of different paints. He'd actually, in fact, run through the paints that you would need if you wanted to paint along with them. In this case, actually, Bob only has the primary colors, kind of more of a darker red in this case, a blue, and a mustard yellow. You probably make yourself several. I'm not going to get down to how you can make and mix different colors, but you all know the primary colors and the different colors you can make from that. So we're going to put that also to the side. And then for Bob Ross, so obviously we're going to want to take his afro off also as well. There's a hard plastic too, although it feels like it's more hollow plastic, but it's a good solid plastic they end up using for it. And you can kind of see again how it slots all into place. Go ahead, carefully remove his ears. And we'll do the same thing on the other side here. And again, with all of these, as you get yourself the container, the only thing that really won't be able to fit into the container is just by the size of it. Obviously, it kind of looks more like a sample you'd see inside of a laboratory, but you wouldn't be able to put the afro inside of that. But you could at least put his arms, you could put his ears, and all the other things that we're about to remove here. Let's go ahead and remove his nose. So now at least he can't smell. Put that to the side. We can take also his eyes off. And let's take his lower half also off as well. What are we doing to poor Bob Ross here? We can also take off his beard. And we can also take off his shirt. Now, when we are taking off the shirt's a little more harder here. You kind of have to slide it off here, the bottom of his body. And then he has a compartment here on the back. And then when you open that up, he has inside a second set of teeth. Now, the teeth that he has right now, you can see he's got a pair of lips with only just the top row of teeth shown. But you can then pop the mouth off and replace it then with this mouth instead, which we might end up just doing here. Open up the baggie. There we go. And dump out the contents. We're going to then put the mouth back into his beard. And this mouth actually doesn't fit as well, I've noticed, on Bob Ross. Like if you look at the lips, for example, they're a little bit more aligned with the outlining of his beard. It can still technically fit through all the way on the other side, but it doesn't look like, it doesn't fit quite in the same shape. I guess the idea is really then you can use these extra parts that are inside the bodies, the cavities there of the potato heads, and then you would use those mouths for like something else. I do kind of wish it would have been still the same size as the beard, so at least it would have been able to fit in there. But we're going to do our best to kind of get everything back in place. And that's basically your stock potato. Holes on the sides, holes on the front, and again, holes on the sides. The original Mr. Potato Heads actually would have been things that had pins, real plastic pieces with pins that you'd actually put onto a real potato. My mother would have had the original Mr. Potato Head. But like this is basically doing the job of giving us a little plastic spud. And again, you can take all your parts and then again, either store them in the container or you can mix and match them with other Poptaters that we're going to be looking at in upcoming videos. Let's go ahead now and get everything back in place. So again, like the easiest thing I find is to get the shirt on first. The shirt, you really have to kind of, you really feel it tight fitting when you put it onto the actual potato body. Go ahead then, take the legs, put the legs back into place, slide the shirt back down just to make sure he's not showing any little bit of his potato tummy. And then we can go ahead and let's put his beard back into place. Now, again, I haven't tried it yet with the smile. It doesn't fit as well. So again, it leads me to believe that you really would want to use it for something else. You obviously don't want to have it. You could have it, I suppose, in an upside down smile, but that would look a little off. Yeah, the only thing, again, I really wish that the smile could have fit a little bit better. So maybe what we'll do is we'll leave that off and maybe use it for another potato head. And just, again, show you, if I left the beard off completely, even though it wouldn't really be Bob Ross anymore, you could easily just attach that in place instead. Let's go ahead and remove that, put the beard back into place. And the beard actually doesn't have necessarily little pegs on the insides. It sits more just frictioned against the side of the mouth. And then again, like the main mouth part is the thing that's really going to be keeping it in place. Plug that back into place. And I guess really that's not all the way in there either. Why was I having a harder time with the smile? The smile looks like it's about the same shape. Let's just see if I can plug that in a little bit. Maybe I wasn't pushing it in as far. Yeah, it just doesn't sit as well as the bigger, as the lip mouth. Anyways, let's plug that into place. Take the rest of Bob Ross's features, his nose. Let's go ahead and take his eyes. Actually, those are his ears. Plug those in also on the sides. Do the exact same thing on the other side also as well. And the fun thing about Mr. Potato Head, like I had a Mr. Potato Heads when I was growing up also as a kid. I also had the Mr. Potato Head Kids, if anybody remembers those. But they all kind of work the same idea that you can mix and match the parts. Take yourself Bob Ross's eyes, put those back into place. Carefully putting on the part that has the palette, the paintbrush. And then finally the afro. Plug that back into place. Yeah, it's a good looking Bob Ross. And again, the benefit of it is you have the containers also as well. So like, I'm not going to be using the mouth for right now, so I can put that inside the container, put the lid back on. When you are putting the lid back also down, you want to make sure that the lettering, for example, is facing downward, because when you have it facing up, it doesn't actually line up properly. So you want to just flip that around, fit that in place. And now I've got myself an extra pair of, an extra smile that I can use for another Poptater. All in all, just a really nice, really fun. I actually had looked, I think, at a couple of these years ago. There was the Jason Voorhees. I think it was also a Freddy Krueger that we looked at here in this channel. Again, they're bringing back some brand new pop icons. Bob Ross, again, when you think of painting right away, you think Bob Ross. And, you know, as it pretty much is just all sort of stereotypical things you think of Bob Ross, like the big giant afro, the beard, and again, like his trademark light blue shirt. Again, it's all the things you would recognize right away with Bob Ross, and they've captured nicely, I have to say, a really nice, cute little Bob Ross, here presented as a potato. Every Sunday afternoon on PBS, I would either be checking out a single episode of Bob Ross, or at times they would also have marathons where they would have back-to-back episodes of The Joy of Painting. And Bob Ross was always a down-to-earth guy, instructing you guys how to draw single trees, or a lot of times he would never really stop at one tree. He'd always draw a second friend tree next door to him. And even though his painting technique seemed simple to Bob Ross, it was never something I would be able to pick up unless maybe I practiced a little bit more. Truth be told, I did actually try to do a Bob Ross painting. It didn't come out anywhere near close to looking as good as when Bob Ross was doing it on the show. Now, unfortunately, his legacy is left behind here with now merchandise. The merchandise, unfortunately, like many of us do know, does go to maybe not necessarily the estate of Bob Ross or any of his family members that are still living. Unfortunately, it goes to somebody else. But for me, at least, I always consider it as Bob Ross is leaving behind a legacy. If my daughter, for example, can be in a store and say, who is that person over there? And I can say, that's Bob Ross. And that's enough for her to be interested to see an episode of Joy of Painting. And unfortunately, even though it's not necessarily going always to the right people, I do think at least Bob Ross's legacy is being left behind for new generations to find and love the show that he used to create, the Joy of Painting. Obviously, when it comes to the Poptater version of Bob Ross, I think they've done a pretty good job of actually capturing exactly what Bob Ross would look like. Yes, it would have been nice in a perfect world that Peapod Jr. could have been inside his pocket, but at least he does have his palette in one hand, his paintbrush in the other. And yeah, you can take all the parts off, and maybe just short of the clothing and his afro, you can take all the parts and you can actually put inside that little kind of petri dish container that comes included with it. That's, again, really smart that Super Impulse included that with their Poptater line. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at Super Impulse that did provide the new Poptaters Bob Ross. What do you guys think of it? Let me know down below in the comments section. And did you ever watch The Joy of Painting, either as a child or later on in life as an adult? Maybe you stumbled onto the show and you've been a big fan ever since. Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of Bob Ross. Also, as well, if you enjoyed this video, hit it with a like. If you're loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly do want to stick around for more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.